So hello and welcome to the Healthful Mind Clinic. Today I am with Debra from Eat Well to Live Well, and we are discussing gut health and the importance of your gut-brain axis and the implications for not having good health on not just what's going on in your gut, but what else is going on with you generally, whether that be sleep, emotions, and general health. So, Debra, would you like to introduce yourself to start with?
Yes, hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Debra. I'm a registered nutritionist and have been for the last 9-10 years. And I specialize in the impact of stress, whether physical or emotional stress, on our health, our well-being, and particularly the gut and gut function. I stressed for many years and I saw the impact that stress can have on our health. And if we can deal with our gut, we can deal with the stress, and vice versa. We can deal with stress, we can deal with our gut.
Yes, we've talked before, haven't we, about IBS and how that one of the first places when we get anxious is that it affects the gut because that's part of the sympathetic nervous system and it makes it overactive. But we're going really much deeper than that now, aren't we, when we talk about gut health, because we're talking the microbiome, what goes on inside of your gut, those, what is it, something like 4 kilos of bacteria that you have living inside your gut that impacts. So actually, a slight detour there, but yeah, one of the most fascinating facts I learned about gut bacteria is that that's where you make serotonin, and that anybody that suffers from depression are likely to have been given an antidepressant or an SSI, and they talk about the serotonin and making more serotonin uptake, whereas it is the gut that makes that serotonin. 95% is made by that bacteria, and yet here we are treating depression with something that affects the brain rather than going straight for what potentially could be the root cause.
Exactly. That was always my thing with clients that come to me with depression and perhaps have been on antidepressants, explaining to them only 5% is produced in the brain, and what that medication is there to do is to keep it in circulation. I said, well, that's wonderful if you're producing it in the first place. But if you're not producing it, what are you recirculating? Nothing. So for some people, there'll be a short period of time where they'll get a bit of a benefit, but over time, the doses has to keep going up. But nobody's checked to see whether they're actually producing any serotonin in the first place. And the gut is a very easy way of determining whether what a stool sample would be useful to help with that, is to see what's going on, see how well our microbiome is in balance. Because if it's not in balance, chances are your serotonin levels will be a lot lower than they should be. So an antidepressant is not going to work to solve the problem. It might have a very short-term benefit, but if there's nothing there to recirculate, we're achieving nothing.
So how would you explain to someone, or what are you looking for when someone comes to see you? How can someone determine whether it is their gut or their gut bacteria that is potentially, if not causing, but having an impact on the state of other aspects of their health? What in particular are you looking for?
Well, it's very complex. Everybody's different, and everybody will show some similarities, but some people will have something that's slightly different. So a stool test is something I usually recommend for people, because that gives us a really good indication of how well you're digesting your food, but also how well we are living in harmony with our microbiome in our gut. We can see the numbers and the population of the different bacteria. There's been a lot more research over the last sort of 10 years into this, and we now understand a much greater detail which of the bacteria, they all have a beneficial impact on us, with the exception of anything that's not so good. As I said, there's lots of bacteria that we can get from the environment that are not good for us. But generally, we live in harmony with a really good balance of those gut bacteria. And most of them are, we get them at the point of delivery. So through the birth canal, that's where we will actually pick up because when you're born, you're completely sterile of any bacteria. But our gut bacteria is picked up through the birth canal, so when we're born. But even the good bacteria can overgrow and can cause all sorts of complications. So when we're looking at, you know, how we would manage it, dealing with a broad spectrum probiotic might not be the solution for somebody. We may need to be a lot more targeted. But when I see a client, there's a lot of questioning that I do, and I go right back to, if we can, birth, because that will give me a lot of indications. If they were cesarean section, then there's chances are then they're struggling anyway. But I would look at a lot of the symptomologies and say I can't put one aspect because everybody's slightly different. But how people eat, do they focus when they're eating their meals? Explaining to a client the other day, when we digest our food, it starts in our brain. We don't digest our food in our stomach at the first point. It starts with our brain thinking about what's happening, because we have to send that cascade of communication down through each of the receptors. So we've got to create saliva, we've got to swallow that saliva. And that all starts in the brain, in our senses, in our seeing the food, smelling the food, perhaps hearing it cook. So our communication channel to our gut to tell it something's coming starts right at the very beginning of our digestion. Over 80% of our vagus nerve sits in our gut. It channels through there. Our immune system, over 90% of our immune system is in our gut. Anything that we take on board has to go through our gut for us to absorb it. We absorb through our skin slightly, and obviously we breathe in, so obviously there's the oxygen side through our lungs, but everything else we have to consume and has to go through our gut. So our immune systems, the strength of the immune system has to be on everything we put in our mouth.
Yeah.
So we've got to have a really strong defense mechanisms for everything coming through. And the first point of that is saliva. It's slightly acidic. It will deal with some minor bacteria, but our stomach, where we produce stomach acid, needs to be at a good level to kill off any pathogen bacteria that we could be digesting. And that will be the first point of defense.
So we were talking just before we came on camera, weren't we, about one of our joint clients that we're working with, who was having quite a lot of bloating, discomfort, constipation, and that she's been thrilled to very quickly recognize through your testing of, well, explain the test to her to see if she had enough stomach acid and how that was impacting on her.
Yeah. Well, we need to do it on an empty stomach, but basically we will do a test using bicarbonate of soda. We're adding an alkaline to hopefully an acid environment. So if you think about, if you put bicarbonate of soda into a glass of vinegar, you would see it bubble. And that's what we're trying to see is, so on an empty stomach, I want to see what level of stomach acid would be there. We're not instructing it to produce anything. So there should be a constant level of stomach acid always in your gut anyway. And that test will give me an indication, depending on how quickly we get a reaction. The reaction is we would burp. Those bubbles would have to be released. A lot of clients come to me with reflux and conditions like that, and they've been prescribed antacids. The problem is high stomach acid and low stomach acid produce the same symptomology. And the reason it produces the same symptomology, if you think there's low stomach acid, and you've just eaten a meal, think about a car and you're trying to turn it over, you eventually flood the system. That's what happens if your stomach acid levels are low. The body then has to keep firing up, keep trying to produce acid to break the food down. And that's where we then start to get a bit of reflux for people. If the stomach acid levels have been good in the first place and the instructions had come from the brain early enough to say a meal's on its way, the stomach acid levels would have been good enough to, without that constant revving. And that's what I find with people, it sits high, it's uncomfortable, they'll have flatulence, and when they burp, they can taste the food again. That's all very clear signs to me that they haven't instructed their stomach acid.
Yeah, and so that then you're saying can be partly down to the fact that they haven't, if you like, done the preparation for eating, and that's a sign of modern life, isn't it? That
it is,
even just a ready meal or a takeaway, if you haven't done that preparation. So in mindfulness, we very much will promote mindful eating, but also mindful preparation of the food, to spend that time to notice the colors and the textures and the smells and everything to do with the food. So you're getting already that anticipation, and your mouth is watering and you're getting hungrier, whereas we're so used to, oh, I'm hungry, just shove something in my mouth without even or being, or
I need exactly, or I need to eat now because I'm between appointments, I'm in the car. So quite often they'll eat and they're not actually hungry, but this is my time frame. And this is what I say to people: we need to be more respectful of how the body functions all the way through the pathways and the biological processes that go on. There's lots of little receptors, and those receptors need to receive those messages for it to do what it's supposed to do. And if something hits it before it's been given the warning, it won't know how to deal with it, and it will always be constantly trying to backtrack. And that's what I say to people: you need to send those instructions. The stomach acid itself production then instructs the liver and the pancreas to work. So the stomach acid doesn't go through into the duodenum at all. The stomach acid production, the actual focus of that, will actually release other chemicals, which then trigger the next stage. And we need the pancreas to be instructed to get the digestive enzymes for the next stage. We need the liver to be instructed to get the bile release, to break down fats. So the cascade has to follow with that first instruction. So as I say, the brain, the communication is constantly going back to the brain to say, this has arrived, this is on its way, what do I do now? And each pathway will then be triggered in for it to happen.
So it's obvious, I suppose, to a certain extent, if someone's got digestive issues, then and they're very aware of them, then they try and do something about them, whether they're constipated or they're going to the toilet too often or bloating, then it's obvious. But what about other health problems then, like fatigue or headaches or hormone issues? Now, people wouldn't necessarily automatically look to their diet as ways to address that, but it does matter, doesn't it?
It does.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, we take the next stage. You know, I've just said the stomach has to break the food down. It needs to be broken apart into smaller particles so that the nutrients that are in there can be absorbed through the small intestine walls. That's where we absorb everything. We need the enzymes to function to break that food further apart. So, for instance, B12, which is in meat products. So they're proteins. They're a molecule that's really tightly bound together. So it needs stomach acid to start that breaking up process. It then needs enzymes to help too. It then needs the gut bacteria to pull it apart a bit. For it to be absorbed through the gut lining into the bloodstream, for the B12 to be doing all of its vital things, most importantly, our neurotransmitters, our brain chemicals. We can't function without B12. So if your stomach acid is not producing, you're not getting the digestive enzymes, that food product will stay bound together. So it will transit through much, much slower, and very little of those nutrients will pass across. So the lack of those nutrients can then lead on to a multitude of conditions. So for instance, hormone imbalances, things like that. We need a lot of those nutrients in order for our hormones to be produced in the first place. But also for them to be broken down and removed, they need to transit through the gut. So a classic one of PCOS or menopause especially is the recycling of estrogen. We get rid of estrogen once it's been used through our liver, and our liver deposits all our waste material into our bowel for us to excrete and get rid of it. So if somebody comes to me with constipation, chances are I'm usually seeing hormonal imbalances as well, because in the large intestine, that bacteria breaks them apart and the estrogen gets reabsorbed back into the bloodstream and it recycles back round again. So we see a dominance of different hormones. Again, that's just through a simple transit. So our digestive health is vitally important.
I'm seeing a high level at the moment of menopausal clients with hair loss as well. So that can definitely be associated with stress and things like that. But again, I would think that there's a large gut and nutrient reaction or
the mineral deficiencies. And that's what I say to people. I look at our body as sort of a bit like the dashboard of an aeroplane and all the different lights, and those are the sort of signals. I do a questionnaire when people come to me, and there's lots of little things which I sort of think, why do I need to answer this? And it's a multi-questionnaire. And they put little markers next to the things that are going on, and it will be things like that. My hair's become particularly dry or brittle, or my nails, or my skin doesn't feel so good. And they're all just little warning signs that perhaps there's some deficiencies in nutrients somewhere. Their diet could be the best in the world, and I'll have a weekly diet sheet from somebody, but if they're not absorbing those nutrients, or they are recycling toxins because the digestive tract is slow, then we'll start to see some of the symptomology get worse if we don't deal with it.
So I suppose to summarize a bit, that diet is important. Obviously, if you're putting rubbish in, you're not going to get goodness out. That's just an impossible equation. This won't work. But if you are able to be calm and mindful and give yourself the time and the space to eat, and to prepare the food and to let that food digest. So is time of day of eating important?
It is important. I think people need to consider, meal times. We don't do that so much as we used to, sitting at a table and making time to eat perhaps the evening meal. I look to the Mediterraneans and I think about, how long they take for their evening meals. They don't eat huge quantities, but they do take time. But that's more of a social, so they don't always mindfully eat with their food. And I say to people, make sure the meals that you're having, whether you only have 2 or you have 3 meals a day, that you take time for those and you prepare for them, whether it's preparing the food or preparing a space where you can have that food. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. The client this week was, she doesn't have a long lunch break and she doesn't want to focus too much on her food. And I said, well, just sit for 10 minutes, just take yourself out for 10 minutes. And that's when you focus on your food. So time of day, it's not, I don't advocate no breakfast or you must have an evening meal. You have to work around that individual's lifestyle and what they're doing and take moments that work for them. So always making sure when you're having a meal, whether it be a large meal or just a snack, that you're focusing on, I'm actually eating. I get a lot of clients come to me and they can't remember the last time their stomach actually rumbled. They're losing that communication with their gut. They're just eating because, I say, it's between appointments or this is lunchtime, so I need to eat, and they're not actually hungry. They didn't actually need food at that particular point, so they haven't got any of those instructions happening. I would say to people, if you're stressed, don't eat.
Well, I understand. Yeah, I understand part of the rumbling is that migrating motor complex in the small intestine, that wash through to, because the small intestine should be sterile, it shouldn't be full of bacteria. And I know quite a lot about SIBO, being a sufferer myself, and a gurgling stomach is something that's very alien to me. And it's like, well, where is my migrating motor complex? And so I always leave it 5 hours, at least 4, but 5 hours between eating, and 12 hours at night, because that's meant to give the body the best chance to wash the bacteria through. And if the bacteria are sitting in the small intestine, or the food is sitting there because it's not getting that wash through, then that's when you start to get the SIBO issues. I mean, I have motility issues, so it could be to do with that as well. But it's working, partly learning what your body does and working with you, with it the best that you can.
Exactly. We're out of the situation where we live in a situation where our bodies are designed for, which is feast and famine. We never have a famine situation. We just literally have food on tap all the time. And that's what I say to people is wait until you're actually hungry before you eat. You know, so leaving it at night. So don't eat after 7 or 8 o'clock at night and then probably have a breakfast too early. Have breakfast at 10. If it's, a lot of people are trying because they've lived with breakfast as the most important meal, got to eat breakfast. If actually that you're not ready for breakfast, that's not a problem. Allow for the body to be ready to break that fast. But quite often we're not fasting. We're not actually going without food for long enough periods of time for the body to work out, actually, I've got other nutrients here I can use. I don't need a constant fuel supply to digest because I've still got stuff going on anyway. Especially when I'm dealing with people with weight issues, this will re-educate the body to use its own stores. It stored it there for a reason. We'll re-educate it, allow it the opportunity to find that resource and use that as its nutrients rather than constantly just feeding it. But we are in that society of food is so readily available. Clients do say to me, I eat when I'm stressed. When I'm stressed and I'm upset, I'll eat. Well, that's probably the worst time to eat because your digestive system's been switched off. So,
and the choices of food made for comfort eating are never high in nutrients. They usually it's that survival response, isn't it? It's the high carbohydrates, high sugar, high fat, instant energy. So I'm an advocate of clean eating, which I believe you are too. Not going obsessively, but if there's something on the packet that doesn't even sound like a food, and you certainly couldn't eat it as a standalone product. In particular, actually, because I'd explored whether gluten-free would help settle my gut down, but one, it didn't, and two, I found absolutely everything completely indigestible that was gluten-free because they're trying to make it something edible out of something that really isn't that edible.
It's not designed. The heavily processed foods, why do we need to heavily process stuff? You know, nature gives us everything we need in natural form, and I'm a big advocate. If it's got a label, you probably shouldn't eat it because nature doesn't put labels on things. And we've got into a society, certainly with the food manufacturers, of trying to create something. It's a bit like the vegan choices, and I'm thinking, well, why would you want something that's not a meat product to look like a meat product? I don't.
Well, taste like one.
I don't. That doesn't seem. So I try and say to people, eat it lean and meat, and make sure it's clean. So it's as natural as you can possibly get it. If it's come out of a packet, if it's being processed, limit it. Make sure it's a limited amount that you have in your diet. You know, it should be. I was explaining this to a client the other day. Your 5 a day. When they did the research to make the decisions on trying to build that campaign back in 2001, all the research was actually suggesting between 12 and 15 portions a day.
Gosh.
But they never thought that the campaign would work if that's the numbers they started to put on it. But if you think realistically, those portions for the nutrients that they contain and what we need for our body to function, it's like putting a car and only half filling it, expecting to drive to Scotland. If you only have 3 or 4, the body's not going to be able to do all of its normal functions. It's going to suffer because it's not got the fuel it needs, and it needs to be a variety of those nutrients. So I say to clients, 3 or 4 pieces of fruit, and the rest is made up of vegetables. So where do you need to get processed food into your diet if your plate is already full? So
a lot of people complain they don't have time to do the preparation when it comes to eating unprocessed diet. But I think even now you can get packets, and frozen vegetables are very good because all the nutrients are in there.
They're jam-packed in there. I have no issues with using frozen vegetables. Everything can be simply cooked, simple stir fries. You know, we don't need to cook it to death like our grannies probably did.
Well, I'm a soup fan, actually. I think that's a great way. I've managed to introduce more foods into my diet by making soup with them and adding, because they're then softer, easier to digest.
Exactly.
So, okay, so someone looks after their diet, they've corrected that, they've limited their stress, they've addressed that, and somehow they still don't feel right. So when do they know when the time is to get some testing and to know that they really need to know exactly what it is they need to do?
Well, I think if you've gone through those and you have dealt with your stress and dealt with all the sort of lifestyle issues, and you feel you've dealt with your diet, as I say, I have people come to me with the best diet in the world. If things are still not functioning properly, a stool test is probably the gold standard that I would go to say, let's see what's going on. It tells us the gut bacteria. It tells us whether there's any overgrowth of any of that bacteria. It tells us whether there's any yeast overgrowths. It will look at any food particles that are coming through undigested. So that helps us establish whether there's any enzymes not functioning, not working. It will also give us any of the byproducts that are coming from the liver. So if we've got excessive amounts of estrogen or things like that, the stool test we can add on lots and lots of things, as well as hormone testing, but we can look at parasites. There's lots of things that we can look at, which could be something with everything in place, could be what's causing the problem. A little parasite that's sitting in there that maybe you picked up 10, 15 years ago, and it's just been living there. There's usually other courses we would then have to go down. But if you've resolved all those other issues and there's still something going on, stool is the best place to go.
Yeah, excellent.
Definitely. Yeah.
So before we finish, a quick discussion on sleep. I've got Michael Mosley's book at the moment. I love him. He often, recently he's gone on telly and said things that I've been saying to my clients for years. One which was about the conditioned response. He did a program and it was this sensory drink that could create this conditioned response. So transplant patients, rather than having to take medication, they just had to listen to a tune and drink this sensory drink. So, the amazing work that he's done and what many people that he's really bringing to the forefront of this understanding of how we can take back control of our own bodies. And his book on sleep is very much about, yes, there's habits in there, but there's also diet is important. So tryptophan. So I understand turkey and potatoes and warm milk are foods that contain tryptophan, precursors to serotonin, I think.
Serotonin, yeah, that's right.
But that will help you sleep. But also the use of prebiotics. So changing your gut bacteria will help you sleep as well. So how does that work? What's the science behind that?
Well, the science behind that is all to do with our circadian rhythm. So how our adrenals work and how we produce, when we produce our cortisol, and those chemicals and the neurotransmitters all work together. And if our cortisol levels are out of kilt, so if we are awake at night, so if you're a night owl and somebody that's kind of constantly buzzing, that means your cortisol levels are up high. And if your cortisol levels are up high, you're probably going to find your neurotransmitters are going to be low because they're out of kilt with each other. And what you need to make sure is that you get a good wake up call in the morning from your cortisol. That's the wake up hormone, is your cortisol. It shouldn't still be active at 10 o'clock at night. It should be much lower. Again, there are some tests where we can do a cortisol test and we can see what's happening. You're right about the serotonin, the tryptophan. Bananas and Brazil nuts are other good sources as well. And that, I say to people, is a little snack just before you go to bed of half a little green banana and maybe a couple of Brazil nuts. The selenium in there will help with the production of your melatonin, so your sleep chemical, and the cortisol will drop away. So we need to make sure that our sleep hormones are coming and our awake hormones are reducing. A lot of people get a wake up at sort of 3 in the morning, and more often than not, what that is adrenaline kicking in because your blood sugar levels have dropped. So eating, this is what I say about this fasting time. If you're stopping eating at 7 o'clock in the evening and you're not going to eat till later, it needs to be something you build and work towards, because a lot of people I find is that their blood sugar levels will drop because they've probably had something carb based maybe for night meal, which is very quickly digested. So their blood sugar levels will drop at about 2-3 in the morning. And what the body will do in order to get its glucose levels, just to keep the brain functioning, because that's all it needs to function at night, our body doesn't need any, it will release adrenaline, because adrenaline will instruct for glucose to be produced. That adrenaline wakes you up when you wake up. And I'm buzzing. Why am I wide awake at 2-3 in the morning? Once the brain's got its glucose, eventually you will go back to sleep. But if you've given it something that's slow release carb based or a protein, it will give the body enough to get it through the night. But that's what I'm noticing with a lot of people, is that when you can do some blood glucose tests through the night. I don't do them, but there are some monitors that you can have, and a lot of people are getting a low drop at about 3-4 in the morning, and that's when they get that wake up call.
Yeah.
The problem is it then kicks in the cortisol because you've woken up, and that's when we then see the cycle at the other end, them still being awake at 10 o'clock the night later.
Yeah.
So
and that's when they do the thinking.
Yeah.
The thinking starts when the adrenaline starts,
exactly. And that's when the brain starts working at 2-3 in the morning.
Yeah.
So a little something like that, as I say, a green banana, so not too ripe, and a couple of almonds, but as I say, Brazil nuts are the best because of the selenium to help with the melatonin. Is about getting that enough in there to keep the body asleep, but also allowing for the function of those hormones to balance themselves. But sleep is vitally important to get those back into kilt. So it's like jet lag. You know, we need to make sure that it's dark so that the brain knows it's night time. So we have to make sure that we can get our body clock working effectively. But that's how it links in with sleep patterns and our gut.
Yeah, big issue with teenagers there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mind you, I have a almost 23-year-old, 23 this week, and his sleep is a nightmare. He's always had difficulty sleeping, but he's definitely an owl, but he's an owl that only takes naps, I think. Yeah, difficult one. So to summarize, really then, that diet is way more than just putting food in and keeping your weight or your energy levels at an acceptable level. It's so complex about how it keeps your neurotransmitters going and the function of your hormones, and generally, it's the fuel for every aspect of your life. So we really do need to respect our bodies enough to listen to them as well about what food we put in and what works for us and what doesn't. And if it's not working, then look at the type of food you're putting in, how you're putting it in, the time that you're giving yourself for those meals. And obviously, is there something within those foods that's not really agreeing with you? Lower your stress levels, address any emotional issues that are fueling these problems and maybe making you less able to eat what you would have eaten otherwise, or hindering your digestion. But then if you're still not feeling how you want to feel, then the time is to go and see Debra or to see a nutritionist, get some functional testing to not just keep up with the trial and error and keep doing what doesn't work. Because if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got.
Yeah.
So to really actually find out what's happening, a lot of people will just go to the health food shop. And I had a client yesterday, actually, which I hope she's going to come and see you. And she said she has a cupboard full of products of which she's tried, haven't agreed with her, made things worse. She's not got on top of anything. And actually, go and see Debra, have an appointment, do the test, find out what's going on, and then you know what you're working with. And if you don't know what you're working with, then you are running on trial and error, and the chances of getting it sorted quickly and easily are much, much less. So thank you, Debra, for helping us know what else we can do, as well as the mind work, to make sure that we're healthy. And yeah, if you want to see Debra, then you can ring the clinic. That I'm putting all the details at the end of the video, and yeah, book an appointment with her. I'll put her website on there as well, because she has her own website. And yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, and be kept up to date with all this type of information, where we're exploring many different healthful ways to have a healthful life. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You're welcome.